Hi, welcome to another episode of Family Conversations, the show where we talk with some of the top family communication scholars from across the country. And today we have a really brilliant scholar with us. As a critical cultural, interpersonal, and family scholar, Dr. Nivea Castaneda is interested in the cultural, gendered, and familial discourses that challenge survival when people experience silence trauma in the family. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. Her work has appeared in the Journal of Family Communication and in an excellent edited collection called This Bridge We Call Communication. Highly recommended. I'll put that in the link so you all can find it. And currently, Dr. Castaneda is a lecturer at Boise State University. Welcome to the show, Dr. Castaneda.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited, and I love the Wolfpack hat.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm loving being at the University of Nevada. Great people, great department.
I miss Nevada so
right,
much.
You grew up in Reno, right?
Yes, so I grew up in Smith Valley, which is 2 hours southeast of Reno.
Okay.
But I ended up going to the University of Nevada for my bachelor's degree and my master's degree because I was the first in my family to go to college. And so one of the rules was you can go to college, but it has to be as close as home as possible. So yeah.
All right. Well, maybe one day we can get you back here. I would love that because obviously you've done a lot of great things in the field, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those in a moment. But first, one thing I love to ask every guest, this is the first question that I like to put out there. How did you find family communication? What was it that was appealing about family communication, or that kind of got you where you were like, oh, this is it, I'm going to be a family communication scholar? What got you into studying families?
Yeah, so well, it all started with my family. So I'm a first generation Chicana, which means that I was born and raised in the United States, the first in my entire family to be born and raised in the United States by Mexican parents. So my parents crossed the border in 1986, 87, right? And so I've always been fascinated how our families are the center of everything that we do. Like, we cannot do anything without getting families' approval. And so our collective being is always at the forefront of what we do. And so I've always been fascinated on the personal level. But then I went and I was a high school teacher at North Valley's High School in Reno. So I got my bachelor's in secondary health and Spanish education. And I was actually very lucky to be surrounded by a lot of Latinx students. And I also saw the family at play, right? Always the family was at play. And so because I was teaching health, I felt like I was constantly counseling. And working with counselors. So I ended up getting my master's degree in counseling and educational psychology, also in Reno. So the goal was for me to be a counselor and a therapist, and I'm good. As I was doing a bunch of the internships, and I was constantly doing the therapy with Latina adolescents, I would see these patterns of them not wanting to share enough out of respect for their families, right? And it was stuff that wasn't even like super hardcore that was detrimental to the family, but it was just that constant respect. And so out of that, I'd constantly always look for that research, like what kind of interventions do I use with this type of person who's seeking therapy versus this type of person? And I was always having a hard time finding that work. And one time, it was towards the end of my program, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but Dr. Daniel Perez at Nevada, he was in the literature department back then, but he was like, well, why don't you go and do the work, do the research that you're looking for? And I was like, I don't have time for a PhD. Like, this is it for me. But I ended up being so hungry for that culture aspect and for that family aspect. So I actually went broad, right, when I was at PhD programs. And so I just remember typing like family culture therapy, family this and that. And a few programs came up, and DU was one of them, because they do have family communication and an intercultural communication track. And so that's how I found Family Comm. And it was different because I went from, again, a very narrow practical field to coming back out to something very broad. But yeah, it was definitely not a traditional way of finding Family Comm. I know a lot of my peers they find family come from the get-go, right? From their bachelor's degree, and then they go into their master's and into their PhD. And I did not have that same journey.
Yeah, but you got a great interdisciplinary experience, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that lets you see our field in a different way than others.
Sure. Yeah, and it's been great for me for the most part, because I'm always constantly looking at, okay, so this is my research, but what does it do? Because my frame of mind is that therapy setting. What does it do? Is this practical? Who is going to do this research from my teaching, right? And so it's been great in that aspect. And at the same time, it's been great in the research realm as well. So.
Well, and Dr. Perez, I mean, what a testament to mentoring and the power of getting people into the field and to these professor roles. He's still at Nevada and still doing excellent work and a lot of mentoring, and so he's a great guy.
I want to come visit him, because I want to say thank you to him for so many reasons, but one of the main reasons is I didn't even know that the word Chicana existed until I took an undergrad class with him. And I remember him saying, like, you're a Chicana. And I was like, I am Mexican American. Like, I am not, like, I've never heard that word. And anytime that I did hear the word, it was always tied to like policy and like just political movements. And I never felt like I was being political enough.
Yeah.
And so he was like, no, you're a Chicana, you will arrive, you trust me. And so he exposed me to Chicanismo, right? And now I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how did I ever not see myself like he saw me, right? So I have so much to talk to him about next time I see him.
Well, again, we got to make that happen. We got to get you to Nevada. Now, your work really takes family communication studies in some interesting directions. And so one of the things I want to feature on this show, and when I decided to do this, that I was like, we've got to get her on as one of the first guests, is I've had the privilege of reading a lot of your work, and including an essay that you recently read that's highly personal, that looks at family communication as performance, for instance. So we can go in other directions, but let's start there. You know, tell me about some of what you're doing in family comm to play with things. So we can start with performance and maybe go to some of the other areas as well.
Performance is it's amazing. I don't know how to, I arrived at performance studies without knowing that that was a thing, right? And I was lucky to take a class from Dr. Calafel at DU. And I just, like, as I was growing up in a hyper white space educational setting, basically, I was always told to remove myself from my essay. So like, why are you using I? This isn't a personal essay. And so on the writing side, I always felt like there was part of me missing, like throughout high school and the parts of college, because again, I was trying to fit within this traditional paradigm of writing. And so when I came to performative writing, I was like, this is me. This is everything that I was told not to be. And there's like a whole field of it, right? So that was, it's amazing. Now, as far as family as performance, I think it's a beautiful way to see family, because that's exactly what family is. Family is performance. Performance is seeing, performance is so visual, right? And so if we, specifically the essay that you're talking about, Dr. Calafel and I talk about how our families perform so often, specifically our mothers, and we're always watching. So they're not always telling us what to do, but we're watching them, and based on what they're doing, then we do, right?
Yeah. So
I love that that is an option for family to be seen as a performative site, because especially right now, when you're seeing all these people saying, how do I teach my children how to talk about race? How do I teach my children how not to be colorblind, right? And I always say, well, your kids are watching, because we're performing. We're constantly performing. My son recently, he's 2, and he puts a hair tie on his wrist, right? Because I always have a hair tie on my wrist. And I've never said, Mateo, put this on your wrist, right? But he's watching me. And so knowing that, and knowing that we can use performance in families as a tool, it's just so liberating on so many aspects, right? So for example, when families ask me, like mom specifically, how do I talk to my 5-year-old about race? Well, you got to do it. You got to perform, right? When you're in these spaces and you are talking to other people, they're watching, right? It's that constant doing, the showing, not telling. So that's why I really love the liberation that if we see family as performance, through performances, specifically in that piece, that essay, I talk about how, so I'm watching my mom perform and she's resilient and she's beating all of these odds, and I'm watching, right? And at the same time, she's also telling stories very performatively. And every single story she tells has a moral to the story, right? So especially in Mexican and Chicanx families, we socialize children through stories, through performances, right? And so we really need to get back to the root of that. And in this case, it is seeing family as performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the essay. I cried at the end. I won't spoil it for the audience, but you probably know the spot where.
Yeah.
Oh.
I actually, so that story you're talking about that probably got to your heart, it happened the November before, so this last November. And I just remember being in awe, like, oh my gosh, this just happened. And I wanted to talk about it, and I did. I shared it with my partner. I shared it with my brother because he knows the backstory, because he's, heard my mom's stories. And so it was really cool to be able to have the opportunity to put it on paper and again see the circular nature of family as performance and what I'm learning, and now what my son is watching me do. So
yeah, we got it all set up for you viewers, so you've got to go check out the essay and see what we're talking about. And then the other thing I love about your work is it's disruptive, because you're really going in there to the interpersonal folks and the family folks and saying, here, look at this stuff. And so I've heard people say performance, like, do they just act out what their participants say? Do they like interview people and then act it out? Which sometimes people do.
Right.
And what's wrong with that, right? What do you think? Well, actually, let's talk a little bit about your doctoral dissertation first, because your doctoral dissertation had the honor of winning the NCA Interpersonal Communication Outstanding Dissertation Award and the NCA Family Communication Dissertation Award. So let's talk about that. Do you mind sharing with viewers what you did with your dissertation?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I would love to share that. So my dissertation focuses on uncovering the processes that happen and the ways that Latinas decide whether they're going to disclose or conceal their experiences of child sexual abuse. And so originally, the reason why this project is very special and near to my heart is because originally it was going to be very traditional, right? It was going to be a CPM study. That was that. And as I was doing my comps and doing this work, I started feeling like I was, in a sense, making these stories fit into this westernized theory. And I love CPM, don't get me wrong. And so I felt like I was assimilating them, right? Because a lot of the stories, which I will go into, but they're called testimonials. I use the indigenous method of testimonial, which is a storytelling device. It really felt like they were telling me these very beautiful, powerful stories. And then I was trying to like make them fit into a category. And so it didn't work. And I just remember going to my committee and saying, I can't force them to fit into this framework. It's like taking the life out of them.
Right.
And so luckily I had a committee that was very willing to work with me and where I wanted my work to go. And so CPM was a starting point in that study, but it wasn't at the forefront. At the forefront of my study were 6 women who shared their stories of child sexual abuse and everything that went into them deciding whether they wanted to talk about it or not. And so I chose testimonial for several reasons. Testimonial is, again, the storytelling device where it's a first-hand narrator. So you tell the story of what happened to you. So you were a witness to something, but specifically you're a witness to your own story, right? And specifically they're retelling something oppressive that happened to them. And so the very act of speaking in and of itself reclaims power. And so I decided that that's what I wanted them to do, right? I wanted them to be able to speak about it, listen to their story, and at the same time reclaim that agency that was taken from them in so many ways. Because it wasn't just the violation of their bodies, but it was the silencing, right? And so to provide this space where you get to tell your story, and something beautiful is going to come out of your story, because I'm going to do everything that I can to create methods and interventions and community workshops to prevent what happened to you, was just very powerful, right? So yeah, I had these women story tell. One of the beautiful things about indigenous methods is that the researcher has to completely relinquish control, and you have to let the stories guide you, which is so scary because you know, we're used to having these pre-described interview schedules of questions, right? And you take it into the interview and you ask these questions and you're recording. And indigenous method says no. They will tell you, they're the site of knowledge, right? They will tell you as much or as little as they want. You just have to ask that first prompt, and then the stories will take you. And so that's exactly what happened. It was very powerful because some of them didn't even start, most of them didn't start with their story of child sexual abuse. Everyone started with their family. And the beautiful part about testimonial that I learned as I was doing the work was that it allows the collective being to come into the research process, right? Because I've done qualitative work and it's very individualized sometimes, but testimonial allowed for them to bring in their family, for their parents to be characters within the story, right? And then it was beautiful. But as they were telling me their stories, again, they were reclaiming agency, and I was learning all of these things. And CPM did come up. Yeah. Some of those elements of CPM did come up, not as often as I thought they would.
Right.
But yeah, so it was that. And one of the other elements of indigenous methods is that you contextualize, so in your findings, based on what you saw in the stories. So even though I had CPM in mind, CPM was one of them, but in fact, it was Chicana feminism that came in, and mujerista theology, which I had never even heard of, right? And so the really cool thing about the dissertation on the research aspect, obviously the most powerful thing was that these women got to tell their stories, and their stories are powerful, but was that on the other end was that you have intercultural health, family, interpersonal, and Chicana feminism, and some parts of theology coming together to produce this work. So yeah, we can blend in these different systems. We just don't know how to do it because it's scary. A lot of people don't do it.
Well, and what I like about your work, there's two things that really shine out to me. One is just an excellent study. So there's that. And your brilliance really shines through. But the thing that I think is amazing is you help to show, like, for instance, how Chicana feminism, there is a big element of family in that, and family communication. And people like to dismiss and go, well, that's not a family theory because it wasn't born and bred in the communication discipline, or, you know, what's that have to do with family? And so I think you helped to shine a little bit of light, even if that wasn't your main thrust, but you show, you know, family theory can be everywhere, and we have to be careful with saying there are certain theories you can use, like CPM, which, you know, you didn't want to use as a cookie cutter. So I love that. The other thing is you had 6 participants, right?
Yes. So I had 7. The reason why, so my dissertation was due like on a Friday, and I interviewed the 7th person on like the Tuesday. So I wasn't able to include her story into the dissertation. Hi, Papa, that's my son.
It's a true family conversation now.
Yeah, right. So I did have the dissertation showcase 6 testimonials. So yeah, and it was once I had these testimonials, then I went back to my traditional, like, I'm going to do a thematic analysis, and then I'm going to have these beautiful categories with sub-themes. And I just got slapped in the face because that is not how it worked.
Right.
Especially because I had 6 participants. So out of the dissertation, I was able to coin what we call I called a narrative portrait. And each narrative portrait basically tells the entire story of each person with the major themes that emerge from from her particular testimonial. And then I did that 6 times, right? And so that way every person had their own space within the dissertation,
Right.
their own chapter, right? And then as I was connecting the stories, like I don't want to generalize people's experiences, but look at how similar we all are. And these are the main themes that came out of all of them. So it was a really cool experience. It was difficult. It was a difficult experience because I did not know how to do it, but it happened.
Well, and it happened beautifully. And I think, so this is the public service announcement of our show. If your inclination is, there's 6, it can't be any good. You know, this is very localized, beautiful work. So if you're reviewer 2 in this case, do not chastise 6 because you artfully showed that 6 participants can bring a world of knowledge, right? When the study's done right, as you've done it. Now that I've made my little comment there about reviewers, let's talk a little bit briefly about family communication in general.
Yeah.
You know, I think family communication is a field in flux or change, and I would hope for the better. So, like, what do you think's on the horizon for family communication?
I can tell you where I want it to go. I hope that that's where it goes, but I want to be a site, a discipline where we attract different people from all over, right? From different experiences. And they come to Family Com and they look at the syllabus and they're like, oh, my name looks like that name, right? And then they get attracted into these spaces and then they're like, I want to get a master's here. And then they get a master's and then they get a PhD and then they're doing work that centers people, communities that always live in the footnotes and the limitation sections of research studies and putting them into the main document, right? As I was in my doctoral program, always in my whole educational journey, every time I read a research article, I never saw myself in the sample. It was always the same type of sample, but I knew that I could find myself in the limitations. So unfortunately, this work does not center these people, but in the future, that's where this work is going, right? And so I got tired of constantly seeing my people in those sections. So I see us taking a radical turn in that we like center these people, these communities, and we do beautiful work, right? Yeah. It's scary though, because no one teaches us how to do it. So
yeah, well, and I think part of the challenge too is people are going to have to be creative with it. Like so full disclosure, I'm not mad at anybody, but I've got a lot of people write me over the past few weeks and say, hey, do you know of any Black scholars to put? I'm like, you're asking a white boy, you know, kind of what, but it leads to the gay thing, right? So they kind of see us all in the same category, right? As like queer, or like there's no poor scholarship either. So even the name recognition, right? So I think people are going to have to be creative in some cases because there aren't a lot of Black family communication scholars whose work there are, and
but why aren't we here? And I say we from as a solidarity, because I'm part of a multiple marginalized. Why aren't we in Family Com? Because we don't see ourselves here.
Exactly.
We don't see ourselves here. And so where do we go? We go to places where we feel seen and where we feel represented. And sometimes it is, well, most of the time it's an intercultural. And that's why we always, when people, they say, so wait, are you an interpersonal scholar or families? Or well, you're intercultural.
Yeah.
Right?
I've been on hiring committees. On hiring committees where they're like, well, they're more intercultural. I'm like, no, their skin's more brown or black. That's what you're really getting at is, right? Like
quickly put me in that track, right? When my work lives here, this is my work right here, right? So yeah, I think that once we center these communities into our work, into our classrooms, we're going to attract people who are going to want to live here. And so that's where I see the majority of family comm going, the research teaching. But I also see, like in a futuristic world, I see family comm being extremely practical, like extra practical, right?
Yeah.
Specifically right now with like Black Lives Matter protesting, and in general, pandemic pedagogy, all those things. But I think that family comm scholars have what it takes to produce very practical tools to literally drop them off to the general audience,
Yeah,
general people,
absolutely.
right? That don't always have access to a journal. So that's where I think it's going.
Well, and I think that's where some of, like, so when I say creativity, I in another episode, Robin Boylorn was the guest, and she said, you
Yeah.
know, there's a, you know, if maybe you can't find the article, but Toni Morrison has written some great stuff about family and Black women's relationships, and so get that on your syllabus. And so maybe people
Right.
will, but I also think, and this speaks to your background as well, you know, some of that stuff from counseling could be very valuable to help, because we like to think we're practical, but we're not always wrapping it up in this nice bow and giving it to people to use. And in fact,
Exactly.
the you know, the tethering to theory sometimes even prevents that, right? Because we're more worried about,
Yeah.
are you perfectly doing communication privacy management, which, you know, also doesn't let the
Exactly.
theory grow. So anyway, I'm
And
sorry.
also we have to think of systems, right? Like you have, for example, R1s, R2s, R3s, and let's just focus on R1s and R2s, and people are so focused on publishing work, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do to be able to elevate status. But then you're not doing the community work, because that doesn't really weigh much in those spaces.
Right.
And so that's why it's not, sometimes I give people the benefit of the doubt of, I'm sure that people don't say like, I'm going to just do this. I don't want to give it back to this community. It's because that's the system that they're working in,
Exactly.
right? So I do see not just family comm, but in general, academia opening up and seeing community research just as powerful and brilliant and intelligent as
Yeah.
your quantitative scholarship, which it is. Quantitative scholarship is also very extremely intelligent. And how can we, again, make these different methods be seen in that same light?
Well, I love we're to a point now. You're not the first guest to say, you know, and quant is good. Like we see you and we recognize. But I actually love that that's a part of the conversation now, because it used to be like, hey, we're here too.
Right.
Now you're hearing people say like, no, we shouldn't throw quant out, right? So
Yeah.
field in flux. Good thing. All right. So this has been a lovely conversation, but our time is up. And so, but before we go, I would like to ask you the question that I've been ending with for everyone. And that is, what is something good that we should be reading as family communication scholars? It can be old, it can be new, article, book, even be a movie, whatever, something you think family comm people should consume.
I am obsessed with this book. I'm so obsessed with it that I'm doing a book club for Chicanas and for other people who want to know more about it. But it's called "I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter," and it's written by a Chicana woman, and it centers a Chicana character, so it centers me. It's the first book that I have ever read where I can shapeshift from one language to the other and not know that I did that, right? Because I'm used to reading all English or all Spanish, but never the both, right?
Right.
So I love that book. That book highlights, again, a Chicana character. It shows the disconnect between this generation, so my generation, and my mom's, right? So the plight that they had versus the plight that we have. And so it's just such a beautiful book. I'm actually going to have my family comm and intercultural students read it, because you just see family at play, and you see all these systems of privilege and power at play dictating how families perform, right? So it's a very beautiful book. I think that we should all read it. And for those of us who are saying, but it's about not being a perfect Mexican daughter. I'm not Mexican. Why should I read this? Well, because we read and continuously read books that have white characters, and we're just fine. So
Really? What? No, I'm kidding.
yeah, but you can do it too. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
sorry. I couldn't remember.
Okay, that's okay.
All right, well, we are out of time. Is there anything else you'd like to add to today's conversation, or anything you feel
No,
like?
I'm actually, this was great. I'm excited that these conversations are happening, and I'm excited to watch you next. Is it next week? Yeah.
The next, yeah, the NCA show will be very soon. So this is the more interesting part, actually. This is why I like to do these conversations, because
Yeah.
it brings in other voices. And I like to joke on this. The production values are low, but I really think these conversations are good. And so I
Oh my
hope
gosh,
people
yeah.
can get like I hope this is in a classroom and people can see you
Yeah.
talking about these things, and so on
Yes.
and so forth. And even more, I hope they read your work. And so I will link the book that you mentioned below. And then
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear what happens with your group, because it sounds like you're making some powerful transformations within your community and for people on a very personal level. So I just want to end by thanking you for your work, because honestly, I'm not even joking. Like people say, who do you think is doing interesting stuff? Your name comes to the top,
Thank you.
because I think you're getting the interdisciplinary part. You're expanding what we look at and how we. I mean, there's just so much to it. So
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Jimmie
you.
is a big fan, and it's time to sign off. Thank you all so much for joining in, and we'll see you at the last and final episode of Family Conversations that's coming up. Thank you, and take good care.